Victoria is a disaster zone, but not so much of a disaster zone that voters are willing to kick out the current government, something that slightly baffles me. Indeed, it seems to be a case of a pox on both your houses, with voters seemingly dissatisfied with both the Liberals and Labour, at least according to the latest news poll and really most of the latest polling at the moment, suggesting that the Labour Party could in fact win the next election despite the catastrophically terrible performance under Dan Andrews and then Jacinta Allan and a seeming decision to willfully ignore voters and push ahead with a treaty. It's truly insane to me that people are still voting for Jacinta Allan, but here we are. Like I've said in a prior video, I think a literal sack of crap would be better than Jacinta Allan. But I don't live in Victoria and I don't vote in their elections, so to some extent, my opinion maybe doesn't matter here. However, I don't want to be footing the bill when Victoria comes to be bailed out by the federal government, which it ultimately will do. So let's have a look at some of the polling. The first one that I really want to focus on here is the question: are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way Jacinta Allan is doing her job as Premier? You would think that would be a particularly important question if you're looking at how you're going to decide at the next election. Well, over 60% of people say they are dissatisfied with her performance. So things aren't looking good for her. However, that doesn't mean the Liberals are actually doing a good job, because it turns out that people aren't really going to vote for the Liberals. It turns out that in the primary vote, the Coalition gets 35%, Labour 35%, Others, which is a nebulous grab-all which includes left-wing and somewhat right-wing, so to speak, parties, get 18% and the Greens get 12%. Well, we know the Greens' preferences are overwhelmingly going to flow toward Labour, unless they do something like an informal vote or just tick one of the boxes. The others, let's just assume they flow 50-50. That would put Labour in a winning position. This means Labour is likely to win the next election if the polling remains the same. So, the question is, why is this the case? Well, it seems that people are very dissatisfied with Jacinta Allan, but they're only weakly satisfied with Brad Batten, who leads the Coalition. With the question, who do you think would make a better Premier? Well, 36% of people say Jacinta Allan, amazingly to me, 23% of people say undecided, and 41% of people say Brad Batten. So certainly there's a lot of votes to be won, but Brad Batten is not exactly commanding a lot of interest at the moment. This, in my view, is likely because of the whole debacle involving Moira Deeming and John Pesutto. Now, just to remind you of this, Moira Deeming sued John Pesutto recently over allegations that John Pesutto had defamed her by alleging, or at least insinuating, that she was a Nazi or had Nazi sympathies. And this turned out to be incorrect, which is why Moira Deeming won the case. The debacle has moved onwards over time, with effectively John Pesutto needing to come up with $2.3 million to avoid bankruptcy so that he could pay Moira Deeming's costs. He did this by raising some money on his own and seeking a loan from the Liberal Party. Now, this you would think would be the end of the story, but it wasn't, because now there's a court case to try to stop that loan going to John Pesutto, causing the whole saga to just drag on. Now, personally, I don't think that John Pesutto should necessarily be bailed out, because he made his own decision. He was given ample opportunities to avoid the whole debacle, he was given ample opportunities to apologise, to settle, and to just walk away, but he failed to do so. He decided to dig in and take the matter to court, even though to my mind it was patently obvious he was going to lose, something that the court ultimately determined would be the case. And as far as I'm aware, John Pesutto has not appealed the ruling, either the ruling per se, the level of the damages, or the cost order against him, meaning that it seemed to be patently obvious he was going to lose this case, so I'm not sure why he actually decided to fight it, other than just ego and pride. And this ongoing debacle, which seemingly is not actually resolved at the moment, is weighing down the Coalition. Now, Brad Batten appears to have tried to thread the needle to try to navigate the situation, but there's only so much he can do when his party is imploding around him, and when this situation is just continuing on. Now, that's why I think Brad Batten has not scored higher than otherwise is the case. And it's also why in the two-party preferred, therefore, the Coalition is at 47% and Labour at 53%, which is roughly where Anthony Albanese was at the federal election. But of course, this is not good news for many Victorian citizens. After all, it tells us that 47% of Victorians do not want Jacinta Allan or Labour. However, unfortunately, it means that 53% of Victorians are going to be able to steamroll over 47% of Victorians. It underscores one of the major problems with the Westminster system: the fact that a bare majority can steamroll over a very large minority, i.e., it is a tyranny of the majority. It's a fundamental problem with how Australia's system works. It's why the United States has a much more functional system, as I've talked about before, because with the President, the Senate, and the House, there's more bulwarks against such a tyranny. It's not perfect, but it is less bad than the Westminster system. Now, Redbridge finds something relatively similar. Redbridge is notionally aligned with the Labour Party, or at least it appears to be left-leaning as an organisation, but their polling does not appear to reflect that bias. At least as far as I can tell, they've been relatively similar to the other polling groups. Now, what they've indicated is across all voters, the two-party preferred is 51.5% to Labour and 48.5% to Liberals. Now, it appears this is relatively consistent across most demographics, but not all of them. For example, the Coalition has significantly greater support amongst people who own their own property outright. Furthermore, people under a great deal of financial stress, again, amazingly appear to support Labour, even though Labour is driving the economy into a hole. Labour has more support amongst the inner and middle suburbs and the outer suburbs, and the Coalition in rural communities. The Coalition support amongst income groups is also a little bit bifurcated, according to Redbridge anyway, with it being highest amongst people earning $3,000 a week or more, or earning $1,000 a week or less, which I find to be rather interesting. I also find it to be absurd because with Labour's high taxes, that really most affects aspirational people. Now, like I've indicated, I don't live in Victoria, I don't have a horse in this race directly, but Victoria's trash fire is going to impact federal politics, and therefore all of the rest of us are going to have to pay for the complete disaster that Victoria is. Furthermore, it sets a bit of a precedent for the other states, because we don't want to give other premiers ideas. The states need to compete for capital and for human capital, and since Victoria has manifestly dropped the ball, it lessens some of the pressure on the other states, which means that New South Wales or South Australia or Tasmania or Queensland can start going down the path of ever higher taxes because Victoria has done so and they just need to be less trash than Victoria. Now, I'm hoping that the Coalition get its act together for the election so they can at least get one of the Houses of Parliament so they can block some of the trash that Jacinta Allan wants to pass through, which includes her budgets, it includes her tax increases, and it includes the treaty they want to try to force upon Victorians. But I'm not confident that at this stage they'll be able to do so, because of the 53 to 47% two-party preferred in Labour's favour, well, we saw what happened at the federal election. A small majority can result in overwhelming power in Parliament. Nevertheless, let me know your thoughts about the trash fire that is Victoria in the comments below.